From the Nevada desert to the rooftops of the big cities, renewable energy is on the move.
We are right now on the cusp of a third industrial revolution.
But will Australia continue to be a part of that revolution?
It's pretty clear that the policy in Australia is now being centred around big coal.
We support sustainable growth, but we don't add significantly to power prices.
The big risk for Australia is that we miss out on the biggest economic opportunity of the 21st century.
Politics, power and the new reality. Welcome to Four Corners. The Rudd and Gillard governments had two key policy planks in response to the threat of global warming. One was the carbon tax leading to an emissions trading scheme. The other was a mandated target to generate 20% of Australia's electricity from renewable energy sources like wind and solar power by 2020. The Abbott government is in the process of abolishing the carbon tax. It is also reviewing the renewable energy targets under urging from the coal and traditional electricity industries, with the strong prospect that the targets will be significantly cut back. Businessman Dick Warburton, the person heading that review, is sceptical of claims that man-made carbon dioxide is a major cause of global warming. The government also wants to shut down several related agencies, like the Australian Renewable Energy Agency. The policy shift in Australia comes at a time when hundreds of billions of dollars are being invested in renewable energy around the rest of the world, and at a critical time for investment decisions here. Australia's dilemma is underscored by the fact that we have just about every energy resource in abundance, old and new, dirty and clean. Stephen Long looks at some startling comparisons on both sides of the Pacific.
The sun rises over the rolling hills outside Canberra. In these fields, pasture meets power. Every turn of these massive blades propels wind into clean energy. It's not a new technology, but it may be the way of the future. To supporters, renewable energy is part of a revolution that will eclipse fossil fuels and change the way we live and work. But not everyone sees it that way. Recently, Australia's Treasurer took a tilt at these very windmills.
If I can be a little indulgent,
please.
Here, I drive to Canberra to go to Parliament and so on. I drive myself. And I must say, I find those wind turbines around Lake George to be utterly offensive.
Correct.
And
correct.
I think they're just a blight on the landscape.
And the people you're talking to are paying for them.
Yeah, and look...
When are you going to knock them off?
Well, we can't knock those ones off.
The wind farms that Joe Hockey finds so unsightly are owned and run by Infigen Energy.
So there's 90 turbines here, including the Capital and Woodlawn wind farms.
Miles George is managing director of the company, which operates 24 renewable power plants, 6 of them in Australia. How much power does that generate?
It's enough power to power about half the houses in Canberra.
He's worried about the government's apparent hostility to clean sources of electricity.
We could fit another 30 or so in and we have approval for that.
There's the view that the Treasurer Joe Hockey found so offensive. Lake George with the wind turbines. How did you feel when you heard Joe Hockey had said that?
I was angry that that sort of statement would be made by our Federal Treasurer. I didn't think it was appropriate. Not so much the visual amenity issue, but talking about his inability to stop these things or something like that, he said, which he's talking about stopping an investment that Australian investors have made.
Do you think that is the government's aim? The Treasurer's comments are part of a broader backlash in the coalition. And while it may be too late to knock off these wind turbines, the government's review of the renewable energy target might just kill the business.
Well, if the target was scrapped without any compensation, we would lose 40% of our revenue and our business in Australia would fail.
If the renewable energy target is cut, people are saying that they will have to close down wind farms. It will kill existing investment. You're on the record as saying
that you are not in the business of killing existing investments.
That's correct.
What does that imply?
What that means is very clear that my view and our view is that we support sustainable investment. We will approach the review with an open mind.
But to critics, it seems as if the government has declared war on renewable energy.
This government has an ideological agenda. They want to carve out the impact of renewable energy on the network, and they want to stop renewables in their tracks.
Australia is the Saudi Arabia of renewable energy. There's so much sun, there's so much wind off the coast. And so it makes absolutely no sense. When you have an abundance of renewable energy, why would you rely on a depleting supply of fossil fuels with all of the attendant consequences to society and the planet? It absolutely makes no sense whatsoever.
Across the Pacific, it's a different story. San Francisco, the cultural and financial hub of Northern California. In the Bay Area and beyond, sun and wind power emerging with IT know-how to forge new industries and new ways of doing business. We took a journey through the Golden State as California powers ahead with renewable energy.
It's quite exciting, the job growth that we're seeing. Today, the United States has, for example, 150,000 employees in the solar industry. So about a third of those, 50,000, are here in California. And that's actually a 50% growth in those jobs just over the last 3 years. So we actually have more employees today in the solar industry in the US than there are in auto manufacturing and than there are in coal mining. Well, I think it's absolutely clear that
California Energy Commissioner David Hochschild lives high in the hills above Berkeley, overlooking San Francisco Bay.
That's where we're headed.
California, with a population of nearly 40 million, has legislated that a third of its energy should come from renewable sources by 2020. Commissioner Hochschild says it will easily reach that target.
As a result of that law, we've seen a massive increase in investment and innovation in the renewable energy space. And today, California has the largest wind project in the world, the largest geothermal project in the world, the largest solar thermal and solar PV projects in the world, and the largest manufacturing operation in the state of California today is an electric car factory. So we're seeing enormous momentum as a result of that.
Were you surprised by the pace of the growth of renewable energy?
You know, it's actually not a surprise because history has shown quite clearly when you establish a long-term target and provide that certainty for the market, you get investment and you get innovation and it drives down costs.
About half an hour away at the Port of Oakland is a company that seized on California's support for renewable energy and innovation. It's run by a sun-loving Aussie entrepreneur. Danny Kennedy moved here 7 years ago. His business pioneered the use of satellite imaging and internet software to design and sell rooftop solar.
Hey Gary, it's Mark from Sungevity Solar. How you doing today?
We had this idea that we could take satellite images and aerial photographs and mash them up and do the design and engineering and quoting and sales process to customers over the internet.
Although Australia pioneered solar power, Danny Kennedy had to leave his home country to realise his ambitions.
You know, a couple of obvious reasons. One was the sort of risk capital available here in Silicon Valley and the software engineering, but also because California at that time had a very strong solar market due to the Republican governor Arnold Schwarzenegger's support for the solar market back in 2006.
But it's already loaded up for you?
Today, Sungevity is an international business with more than 500 employees, operations in the US, Europe and Australia, and revenues in the hundreds of millions. Its founder is dismayed by the drift of policy back home.
The big risk for Australia is that we miss out on the biggest economic opportunity of the 21st century. We get stuck in quarry Australia mentality from the 20th century, while the rest of the world is phasing out coal and trying to move to these new industries and creating whole new ways of doing business and jobs which Australians may never benefit from.
As the sun sinks in the sky at Lancaster, California, a baseball game is underway, under lights in a solar-powered stadium. The Lancaster Jethawks are leading the California League. Their city is leading the way with renewable energy.
So you'll be 100% renewable?
Heather Swan is an executive with the Lancaster Power Authority, which has overseen a radical shift away from fossil fuels.
We've kind of gotten started with a grassroots effort that started putting solar on homes and getting the information out to our homeowners and our citizens. And then we took that step a little farther and became the example ourselves, and we put solar on our major city facilities. And those city facilities are now powered about 98% by solar.
Lancaster was aiming to be 100% renewable powered by the decade's end.
Yes, I mean, we were originally given the goal of 2020, but, you know, I think we can make it happen by 2016.
Just 2 years away.
Well, when you say it like that, you make it sound so close, but I know it's not far away.
It's now technically possible to supply all the electricity needs of a city or district without any reliance on fossil fuels. That used to be a pipe dream, but new technologies that allow renewable energy to be stored and used day and night are changing the ballgame. And here at least, support for the new order crosses the political divide.
Your mayor is a Republican. That side of politics in Australia is quite hostile, it seems, to renewable energy.
Well, it is here too, so, but he is a Republican, and he's been quoted in the New York Times as saying, I may be a Republican, but I'm not an idiot. And he's very well educated, and he's very well researched on the subject, and he's an adamant believer in climate change. We're seeing it happen right here in our own backyard.
Tonopah. This sleepy little town in the high desert country of the Sierra Nevada is at a crossroads, where the old economy is making way for the new. Tonopah was one of the last frontiers of the Old West. The discovery of silver at the dawn of the 20th century sparked a mining boom before the town lapsed into fading glory. They campaign hard out here, but there's little division about where the future lies. It's in mining the sun. Less than half an hour's drive out of town is a state-of-the-art solar facility known as Crescent Dunes. If it looks space age, that's because it is. Considered by some to be the most advanced power plant in the world. The project's technical director is Brian Painter, an industry veteran who's been running electricity plants for 30 years.
It's amazing, it's like a mechanical forest.
It is exactly, that's what you're walking through, a mechanical forest. It's made up of steel and mirrors and all this sort of thing.
The huge mirrors on these mechanical trees are known as heliostats.
Each heliostat concentrates the sun's energy on the top of the tower there, the black section there that you see.
What's in the tower?
What's in that black section is molten salt. Molten salt is pumped through the top. It's like a big energy absorber. It's absorbing all that sun's energy that's being concentrated on the tower.
While we were at Crescent Dunes, the process of pumping 31 million kilograms of salt into the tower was still being completed. When the plant starts running later this year, 10,347 glittering mirrors will beam concentrated light onto the tower, where the molten sodium will act like a giant battery, storing the sun's energy.
Crescent Dunes is a remarkable thing to see. This is the first solar thermal power plant in the world to have molten salt storage. So what it does, it takes the energy of the sun produces electricity, and then stores that as heat in molten salt storage. And at night, when they need to make use of that power, they can run it from the heat that's being stored in this molten salt storage facility.
The thing with being able to store the energy is that we can shift the time of delivery. We can deliver nighttime, daytime. When a utility might want power, we can deliver anytime.
Overcoming one of the perceived problems of solar, that the energy is only available when the sun's shining. This technology could be the backbone of a power grid, delivering baseload power as reliably as coal or gas-fired generators. When it's up and running, it will be providing energy into the night for the neon light capital of the world.
That's right. The facility is going to be providing power to Las Vegas. It's hard to think of a city in the world that uses more energy at night than Las Vegas. So it's a great validation of the possibilities of solar and storage together.
The company behind Crescent Dunes wants to bring this remarkable technology to Australia. It's hoping the mining industry will embrace solar power at remote mine sites, which currently rely on polluting and heavily subsidised diesel fuel to generate electricity. It had planned to build large-scale renewable power plants to supply retail electricity, but it's given up on those ambitions because of the drift of policy down under.
And that policy change pretty much took the life out of the renewable energy sector as far as large-scale projects for, say, utility applications. Other markets around the world are advancing. Australia is going to get left behind.
They made a big deal out of it.
Kevin Smith is the chief executive of Solar Reserve, the company that developed Crescent Dunes.
What was the reaction in your sector in the United States when people discovered that a man who denies that CO2 is contributing to climate change was appointed to head the review of the Australian renewable energy target?
Well, it's a little bit hard to grasp that concept. I mean, clearly, that appointment was made because they want to move back towards conventional fuels, coal and oil. It's pretty clear that the policy in Australia is now being centered around big coal. The coal industry clearly has rallied to move policy away from renewable energies because they view renewable energy as a threat and back towards conventional coal.
The new developments with renewable energy and storage seem to have passed the Prime Minister by.
The difficulty with renewable energy is that when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow, well, the power doesn't flow. We've got massive supplies of coal, we've got massive supplies of gas. We should be making the most of our natural advantages.
We saw some amazing stuff.
The Environment Minister denies the Australian government is hostile to renewable energy or biased towards coal.
Well, I think the long-term future for renewable energy is actually very strong. It's about balance, and the right balance here is to ensure that we protect jobs and investment. We support sustainable growth, but we don't add significantly to power prices, and we try to take the pressure off power prices.
What Australia has in abundance and California and Nevada lack is coal. Coal has defined Australia's political economy. And while it can avoid paying for the impact of its emissions, coal is a cheap source of energy. But as renewables gain ground, coal-fired power generators are hurting.
In Queensland and across Australia, there's actually a glut of electricity generation in the market. There's probably 20% more generation capacity in the national electricity market than we actually need. In Queensland, it's probably higher than that. That's the challenge for us.
Richard Van Breeder runs Stanwell, a state government-owned power company and Queensland's biggest electricity generator.
Hence, you don't want to see more renewables coming into the marketplace.
Absolutely, absolutely. And certainly our submission looked at renewables. Our recommendation was that renewable energy targets be phased out over time.
The Tarong Power Station, 180 kilometres northwest of Brisbane, is one of Stanwell's key assets. At full capacity, this giant facility consumes up to 7 million tonnes of coal a year and up to 28,000 megalitres of water to power its turbines. But in recent years, Stanwell has been losing money. In 2012, 2 of the 4 power generating units at Tarong Power Station were shut down.
We've lost 160 jobs on this site. Across our business, 35% of our workforce has left, which was close to 320 jobs.
It's a lot of jobs.
It is, and it's a lot of people you need to speak to. It's very hard to make those decisions, but we've had to do it. Otherwise, the business is just not going to survive.
The problem for coal-fired power utilities like Tarong is twofold. Wind and solar power are pushing down the wholesale price of electricity. And overall, demand for electricity has been falling.
People are not using as much electricity as they used to, with electricity prices going up significantly. People are a lot more circumspect about the electricity they use.
And there's a lot of people in Queensland who've moved to rooftop solar.
Absolutely. I think if you look at the capacity of Queensland's market, probably 10% of that could be close to the solar installations across our rooftops here. I think
10% on rooftop solar?
Absolutely. Very, very significant.
What would you say to people who would argue we're better off losing these coal-fired power stations that pollute the environment and moving towards renewables?
First of all, it's the cheapest form of electricity we have. And we need to have the debate around, is it cheap electricity or is it a move to renewables?
Over the past 5 years, retail electricity prices in Australia have doubled. But how much is clean energy to blame?
Truth be told, the renewable energy targets only had a minor impact on power prices. On the best estimates, about 3 to 4%, offset by renewables pushing down the wholesale price of electricity. What's really driven up power prices has been a massive investment in the network, the poles and wires, the infrastructure. And as it turns out, much of that investment was unnecessary.
They got the forecast wrong. Power prices are going up because power companies have overinvested in the network. And those companies get a guaranteed return on their investment, guaranteed by the government.
The main reason for the increase in electricity prices is the cost of networks. So network infrastructure has been added to pretty dramatically in the last 5 years, and that is roughly half of your total electricity bill today goes to pay for the poles and wires that carry electricity from the generators to your house or business.
As energy prices soared, for the first time ever, electricity consumption went backwards. Although the problem is partly of the industry's own making, the fall in consumption has driven a backlash against renewable energy. Incumbent power companies are saying, why build more capacity when there's already oversupply?
The simple reality is the renewable energy target as designed was designed to fill anticipated growth in the market, and the market conditions have changed.
Matthew Warren is Chief Executive of the Energy Supply Association. It represents the big electricity retailers and generators, and it's pushing to cut the renewable energy target.
We've seen an ever-accelerating decline in demand since 2009. And so that's meant that what was 20% is now looking more like 25, 28, 29%. And that's a much bigger target.
Although it's often called a 20% renewable energy target, that's not in fact what the legislation says. The law calls for a fixed amount of electricity to come from renewable sources by 2020. 41,000 gigawatt hours from large-scale schemes, at least 4,000 gigawatt hours from small-scale renewable energy schemes, such as rooftop solar. Australia's small-scale sector is booming, but it's a long way off the large-scale target. To meet it, There needs to be significant new investment in renewable energy.
The market conditions in Australia with so much oversupply of generation means that we think that the RET as designed currently is likely to fail, and up to half of the RET will never get built.
As the lobbying to cut the target finds sympathetic ears in Parliament, in the national capital, there's a new dawn for renewable energy. If all goes to plan, Canberra will be 90% renewable powered by 2020.
Wow.
That's the Royala Solar Farm.
That is impressive.
It's 80,000 solar panels, enough power to meet the needs of about 4,500 Canberra homes.
How far is it off?
Simon Corbell is the ACT Energy Minister. He's taken me to a power utility 23 kilometres south of Canberra. It'll begin operating in a few weeks' time.
When it does connect, it will be the first large-scale solar power facility connected to the national electricity market.
And still tiny by world standards. It costs a lot to build a plant like this, and that does feed into electricity prices. But in the medium term, the energy will be cheaper because the fuel input, sunlight, is free.
The economics is a no-brainer, and it also drives down the cost of electricity more generally in the market, because often, at times of peak demand, renewables is the cheapest source of energy into the electricity market.
He's having a hard time convincing some of his counterparts in the States.
Fantastic to see them here installed. Well, the other state governments have vested interests in maintaining the status quo. They collect the royalties from the coal mines, they collect the dividends from the coal-fired generators, they own these assets, and they are not interested in disrupting that business model, even though that's locking consumers into higher energy costs over the medium to long term.
A lot of trouble.
B. O'Donnell and B. McGaskill, thank you all. This way. Come on in, good bowl here.
It's a big day at the Orange City Bowling Club in the central west of New South Wales. A troop of Canberran bowlers has bussed in to take on the locals.
Pat, g'day.
Hey, Steve.
How are you?
Nice to meet you.
Got a fair crowd in for the tournament.
It's a fairly big day, unusual because we've got about 50 visitors here today.
Pat Egan is the club's treasurer.
Sun shining, good day.
It's fantastic for bowls, mate. That green is probably running about 16 seconds, which is pretty good for bowls.
Pat's penny wise, but in the face of rocketing electricity bills, he convinced the board to have 360 solar panels installed on the roof of the bowler.
Oh, right in the camera.
Here you can see a good view of them there now. They're in banks of 10.
So you were the inspiration for this, Pat?
Yeah, only because of my personal experience at home where I put a system in 2012 and the savings were coming as I expected. So when I became treasurer here recently, just after my own installation, I'm trying to find ways to save costs.
As you would.
And increase our revenue. But saving costs, what swings out here straight away is the cost of electricity.
Oh, yes.
Thanks,
cheers, Pat.
Nice to have you up a cup, mate.
Cheers.
Over a beer at the club, Pat shows me how much money the rooftop solar has cut from the power bills.
So that was a month's power bill?
Yeah.
$10,000 or close enough?
And this one was 4,891.
That's a huge saving.
It certainly is. We're going to save more.
An electricity bill that was running at $116,000 a year has fallen by more than a third.
Down the track,
and the investment in rooftop solar will pay for itself in 3 years. This humble bowling club may be part of a paradigm shift, a new era for the economy. Danny Kennedy calls it the rooftop revolution. Power to the people.
What we've had is this big power stations at the middle of a hub and spoke model, shunting electrons down a one-way fire hose, telling us what we should pay for it. What we're getting now is the ability to participate in the creation of electricity. We're going to have our own power plants on our own roofs. There's going to be a community-level storage system, a solar farm or a wind farm out the back. And all those are going to take part in the creation of electricity and the economics of electricity. And it's all going to be managed through software and information communications technology.
We now have millions and millions of small players, homeowners, small businesses, cooperatives, even large businesses, that are producing their own solar and wind-generated green electricity at near zero marginal cost. In 10 years from now, 15 years from now, we'll have tens of millions of local sites producing green electricity on microgrids. In 20 years from now, we'll have hundreds of millions of people producing their own green electricity. He's doing now.
Economist and author Jeremy Rifkin argues that green energy and new communications technology are ushering in a period of radical economic change. Just as the steam engine, the telegraph and the printing press drove the first industrial revolution, petrol-fuelled motor cars, the roads network and the electricity grid the second, renewable energy and the internet are combining to create a new industrial revolution, which could be a jobs bonanza.
That second industrial revolution of the 20th century is clearly on life support. It's not coming back. It's waning. We are right now on the cusp of a third industrial revolution. We have to transform our energy resources from fossil fuels to renewable energy. That's extremely labor intensive. We have to convert every building in Australia and around the world to your own micro power plant, installing solar, wind, geothermal technologies right there, retrofitting the buildings.
The pillars of this revolution include transforming the world's building stock into micro power plants that collect and store renewable energy, shared via an energy internet, and transitioning the transport fleet to plug-in electric and fuel cell cars. Palo Alto, California is home to the new green machines of motoring. The Tesla is an electric vehicle that's winning the hearts of motoring enthusiasts. Put one of these through its paces and you'll give a hoon in a gas-guzzling V8 a run for their money and help save the planet at the same time.
This may be the future of motoring. This is a high-performance vehicle. It does 0 to 100 k's in 4.4 seconds, and it can drive up to 502 kilometres on a single charge. There's zero emissions and zero noise, and I love this, there's no exhaust pipe.
Teslas aren't cheap. When it goes on sale here, the high-end model will cost close to $100,000. But a mass-market model's coming, with a price tag of about $30,000. And the cost of electric vehicles is set to plummet.
Well, I think the Tesla is analogous to the iPhone. Okay, when it first came out, it's a beautiful, well-designed product, but expensive. But what you see over time is, as you get to scale, the prices come down. And that's exactly what's happening with Tesla. This is a car that is actually headed towards being a mainstream technology. And honestly, it's actually part of a family of electric cars. You look at what the other auto manufacturers are doing, GM and Toyota and others, they're really headed towards a mainstream technology.
At Tesla's futuristic factory, specialised robots turn out hundreds of cars each week. The company now employs 6,000 people. Soon it plans to build what it's calling the Gigafactory, a mass manufacturing plant for lithium-ion car batteries, which will create economies of scale and dramatically reduce the cost of electric cars.
We think that they are potentially another game changer. If you look at the cars being made out of Tesla in California, they're faster, they're cleaner, they're quieter and they're safer than conventional petrol-driven cars. There are a lot of things that consumers will like about electric cars if they're priced correctly, and they could have a material impact on the electricity and energy supply in Australia as well.
Big incumbent power companies are hoping that mass take-up of electric cars will boost electricity demand, saving them from a death spiral of falling revenues and rising unit costs, as more and more people generate, store and share their own power. But there are no guarantees.
Oh, look, I think we're seeing in the energy industry, it's going through a transformation that's not dissimilar to telephony, to retail, to newspaper media. And that is we're seeing, quite radical transformation driven by technology and driven by changing market conditions.
It's disruptive like media was disrupted a decade ago. Once upon a time, the ABC and New York Times were all the news that was fit to print, and they shunted the news of the day down the one-way fire hose. And now we use social media and Twitter and whatever else to co-create what is the news stream and what makes for big news. And the economics, we know well, has been completely transformed. That's coming to electricity. The coal and other protected vested interests of Australia are going the way of the dodo if they don't adjust to this reality.
When Superstorm Sandy struck the United States in 2012, Americans discovered what it's like when the power grid breaks down. Millions of people across the East Coast were left for days without electricity. No light, no heat, and no communications.
The thing that people had the hardest time with during Sandy was the fact that they were cut off from communications. If you're without power for days, it is not just inconvenient, but it really feels like you can't live your life. Individuals and communities want to have more and more control over their energy system. We again saw this after Sandy, where communities have asked for their own microgrids because they don't want to be as reliant upon the grid.
Both environmentally...
Former investment banker Richard Kaufman is known as New York's energy czar. He's overseeing a move to decentralised electricity.
In the last 10 years, we've invested $17 billion just to keep the grid as it is. And in the next 10 years, if we keep just doing exactly as we've been doing, we have to invest another $30 billion.
The Empire State is instead planning a radically different electricity system, with community microgrids and technology that allows buildings to create and store their own energy.
It used to be that you had to get the electricity that came through the central grid because that was the only alternative. Well, that's not true anymore. So we have had across a whole range of industries the benefit that customers are now in charge. And the technology exists now for that to be true in the power sector. The cost of all of these solutions are going down while the cost of the traditional central station power and distribution systems go up.
In 1980, it cost $35 a watt to buy a solar panel. Today it's 70 cents a watt.
Maiden, North Carolina. A sleepy little southern town. Maiden happens to be home to a major facility of a titan of technology. Apple's data centre at Maiden processes vast numbers of messages, photos, videos, and other content being shared in cyberspace. The computing power needed to process all that content shared on the web and on mobile devices is a massive drain on electricity. The power demands have led to accusations that technology companies have a dirty cloud.
This is the solution. A vast solar farm generating 167 million kilowatt hours of power, enough to make Apple's data centre 100% powered by renewable energy.
It's the largest solar farm in the United States not owned by a power utility, and it's supplemented by fuel cells that store electricity generated from biomass.
The direction towards clean and green energy is one that I believe is the right one and is where the world is going. You know, when you look at air pollution or water pollution issues, when you look at the challenges that we'll face as our populations grow, it just makes great sense. And in this case, it also makes great business sense for Apple and other responsible companies to step up to the plate, acknowledge that climate change is not just a challenge, but also an economic opportunity.
It's quite amazing. It looks like a spaceship.
It does, doesn't it? Some people call it the mothership.
Lisa Jackson is Apple's environmental director, a role she took on last year after serving under President Obama as head of the US Environment Protection Agency.
By renewable energy.
She shows me a scale model of Apple's coming campus.
How many employees are going to be here?
13,000 employees will work at the new Silicon Valley headquarters, and it will be 100% powered by renewable energy. For Apple, it's not just about doing the right thing for the environment.
The power that we use, the renewable energy that we use, is competitive and in many cases cheaper than conventional brown power. And for us, it's more than just the initial price. It's also the reliability of having our own power. For us, we know that power is going to be there. We don't have to worry about changes in the price.
Energy security and price certainty are key benefits of renewable power.
Fossil fuels are subject over time to enormous price volatility. And as you move to a renewable energy future, you're not subject to that because there's no cost for sunlight or wind or tidal power. And so you actually become, I think, more stable as a country and more competitive internationally.
A view echoed by Miles George when we met at those wind farms outside Canberra.
Well, once you've established renewables, the fuel is free forever. Whereas if you have coal and gas-fired power generation, you're exposed to gas prices and coal prices forever.
Look, whether it's wave or solar, whether it's wind or geothermal, whatever the source of energy, there are always operating costs. And the renewable energy companies actually make that point to me almost every day.
While Environment Minister Greg Hunt does see a growing role for renewable energy, he's also pinning much hope on clean coal.
For Australia, I think the message is clear. We can move to reduce significantly the emissions from our current generators. The technology which is emerging now, and which I think will be available over the next 3 to 5 years, cleans up very significantly, not perfectly, but very significantly, by up to 30 to 50% the emissions from current generation. That can go around the world, and nothing would make a bigger difference along with protecting the great rainforests to reducing global emissions.
Perhaps there's also a risk that global action on climate change will push up the price of fossil fuels, leaving Australia with stranded power assets and soaring electricity prices.
So we have enough of these renewable energies distributed in every square inch of Australia and the world to power our species' needs till kingdom comes at near zero marginal cost without pollution to the planet. So what kind of cockamamie thinking, if I may say this, keeps us into these old polluting dinosaur energies and technologies of the 20th century, when we could be in the new energies of the 21st century and have unlimited amount of renewable energy?
Yes, it costs money to create the infrastructure for renewable energy, a lot of money. But existing fossil fuel generators and power utilities were subsidised, by and large built with public funds. If renewable energy becomes ubiquitous, the economies of scale should deliver a radical reduction in power prices that could transform the world economy. Will Australia be leading the revolution, or will it be left behind?
The Warburton review of the renewable energy target for the Abbott government is imminent. But given the confusing signals that are coming from Clive Palmer's new senators on support for renewable energy targets and the future of the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, this debate is far from over. Next week on Four Corners, the story behind the tragic killing of 11-year-old Luke Batty. Until then, good night.